Hello and welcome. Imagine being locked in your head, literally. The terrifying experience of a stroke, a blood clot or leak in the brain often leaves a person aware of what's going on around them, but with no ability to express themselves through speech, movement or gestures. In the USA, stroke is the #1 disabler and #3 cause of death. And yet studying it has been incredibly difficult, largely because those affected can't communicate properly and don't often understand what's going on. So imagine a brain scientist waking up one morning and finding something terribly wrong with her mind. That's exactly what happened to Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, who found herself analyzing what was happening as her brain slowly started to shut down, taking away her speech, movement, cognitive skills and memory. She now lectures on the subject and campaigns for more awareness to help stroke victims. And on this show we ask what happens when the human brain fails and how much do we really know about this powerful organ? Join us with your comments. Well, joining us to describe her terrifying yet amazing experience is Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, a neuro-anatomist at the Indiana University School of Medicine and an active member of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. In her book, My Stroke of Insight, A Brain Scientist's Personal Journey, Dr. Taylor shares her recommendations for recovery, as well as the insight she gained into the unique functions of the two halves of her brain. She's joining us from Bloomington, Indiana. Well, Dr. Taylor, welcome to the show. I would like to ask you, well, first congratulate you on your full recovery and success in getting the word out there. Now, in your book, you say that having a stroke was the best thing that could have happened to you. Why?
Well, you know, you have to understand that I grew up to be a brain scientist because I have a brother who's been diagnosed with the brain disorder schizophrenia. And for me to then have the opportunity to witness the progressive degeneration of my own mind through the eyes of a scientist was a phenomenal educational opportunity. So I didn't realize that I would become so differently abled that I would not be able to walk, talk, read, write, or recall any of my life. But to be able to witness that through the eyes of a scientist, it was, I call it my residency program because it kept me at home. And I just learned as much about my brain because of this as I had before.
Now, in fact, to quote you from your book, where you say, I kept thinking, wow, how many scientists have the opportunity to study their own brain function and mental deterioration from the inside out? Just take us through the first moments of that discovery where you knew something was wrong and how you were able to rationalize exactly what was happening.
Well, when I woke up that morning, I had a pulsating pain behind my left hemisphere, behind my left eye. And it was very unusual for me to experience any kind of pain, but you know, you certainly don't wake up and think, oh my gosh, I'm having a stroke. So over the course of the next hour, I watched my brain go through this process of, for example, I got up and I jumped onto a cardioglider, which is a full body, full exercise machine. And during this process, I was looking at my hands, and my hands looked like primitive claws grasping onto that bar. And I looked at my body, and I thought, boy, I'm a strange-looking thing. And it was as though there was a shift in my perception from being the person on the machine having the experience to some esoteric space where I was witnessing myself having this experience. So as a scientist, I was just trying to figure out, have I ever felt anything like this before? What is going on with my brain? But it wasn't until my right arm went totally paralyzed by my side that was a warning sign of stroke, and then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm having a stroke.
Now, retrospectively, with this cognitive experience, is there anything now that you realize you could have or should have done differently in those first few moments?
Well, yeah, I think that getting help sooner rather than later, reaching out would have been a very wise move. But at the same time, I didn't know that I couldn't speak until I tried to speak. And I didn't know that I couldn't read until I tried to read. So by the time that I had a hemorrhage in the left hemisphere, and as it got bigger and bigger, different functions went offline. But I didn't know that they were gone offline because my brain wasn't saying, hey, you can't read, or hey, you can't speak, until I tried. So it was, my advice to others is definitely, as soon as you notice something strange neurologically going on inside of you, pick up the phone or call somebody and say, you know, contact me in another 10 minutes, or better yet, could you come and sit with me for a while, maybe have some tea.
Now, you know, it's interesting you point out that one of the big problems with people going through a stroke, or with carers trying to deal with stroke patients, is that the issue of communicating. And I want to quote your book here on that issue of communicating, where you say, it wasn't that I couldn't think anymore, I just didn't think in the same way. Communication with the outside world was out, language with linear processing was out, but thinking with pictures was in. Now, based on that experience, is there any way you can suggest how people going through this experience might be able to communicate better? And of course, those dealing with people who are going through a stroke might actually also communicate better.
I would encourage people to communicate through pictures more. If the portion of the brain that understands language has been damaged, then you can talk to that person all you want and simplify it as much as you want, but they're not going to get it. So I encourage people to communicate with pictures, get some picture cards, and have that person communicate with you by pointing to different pictures in order to express their needs. There's still a conscious ability, but the right hemisphere thinks in pictures, the left hemisphere thinks in language. So if language is no longer a tool that you can use to communicate, you still have pictures and a facial expression, body language. The bigger picture is being absorbed by that person, just not the details and the language.
Now, in your book, you'd mentioned just earlier in the interview how your older brother, one of your older brothers, was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and that gave you, well, the passion to study how brains function, but it also gave you an understanding of how your perception of reality and your interaction with it is different from your brother's. And I wonder, having gone through the experience you've been through, how you might better understand the mental world in which your brother lives.
Well, I certainly got the lesson that different people do have very different realities, and just because we all have 2 arms and 2 legs and a head doesn't mean we're processing the exact same perceptions of what's going on the inside. So the biggest lesson I learned is that I am neurocircuitry. I am this beautiful collection of cells, and every ability that I have is dependent upon those cells performing their function. And the biggest difference between my normal brain and my brother's brain with schizophrenia is that he experiences hallucination and delusion. So then the question is, what are the cells in the brain that are resulting in the function of having the ability to experience hallucination, which isn't normal for the typical brain? So it really has given me appreciation for what is the brain at a cellular level, and how can we have an appreciation for people who are different from us in the way that their brains process information.
Of course, for the average person, there's a question about what we really know about brains. And again, if I could quote your book here on what we know and on the issue of what we know, you wrote, "I learned as much about my brain and how it functions during that stroke as I had in all my years of academia." And I wonder, for the average person, as a scientist, as a brain scientist, you could tell us how much we really know about how the human brain works.
It's interesting because the brain and the organization of the brain is profoundly influenced by the language that we speak. And so in the U.S., where we read from left to right, language is going to be organized in our brains comparable to one another. But when you look at pictorial types of language, where you actually have symbols and you read vertically, that language is going to be organized in the brain differently. So, when it's not just what do we know about individual brains and cultures of brains, but collectively as a society, our brains are going to be different based on different pieces of how we feed information to that organ. So, we do understand that cells, you have to have the cells in order to perform a function. I can watch a moving target go past my eyes because I have cells that perform that function. And if those cells have a problem, then I can't track that object anymore. But as far as an overall generalized organization of us as a human species, we're going to have different brain structure and organization functionally based on the input of our culture.
Now, to what extent does having a better understanding of brain function nowadays translate into better treatment for mental illness?
Well, treatment for mental illness for most, well, at least for the U.S., pretty much means a prescription and a medication with an antipsychotic medication, which is a very powerful drug that is going to alter the chemical composition of the brain. So I don't know so much how other places in the world do it, but over here it's pretty much medication. At the same time, we're waking up to the awareness that the individual really does have a lot of say about what's going on inside of their brain. And when I as an individual take some responsibility for managing my disorder, whether it's a brain disorder like schizophrenia or trying to recover from a brain trauma or from a stroke, The more input and willingness I am to manage the symptoms so that I can actually have a better quality of life makes an enormous difference.
Let me get a call in here. We've got Imran on the line from India. Imran, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, my father had a stroke, and you know, his behavior is completely changed now. So he suddenly does things which are like 10 years old, and doesn't let anyone go out of the house. So I wanted to know, is there a complete cure for this disease, or you know, where can I get him cured and bring him back to normalcy?
Okay. If you're able to tackle that at all, Dr. Taylor.
When I experienced my hemorrhage, I lost the person whom I had been before. The portion of my brain that had the hemorrhage was my language center. Part of the language center in my left hemisphere was the part of my brain that said, I am Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. These are the things I like. These are the things I don't like. This is my life. These are the details of my world. And when I had the hemorrhage with those cells and those cells went offline, I became essentially an infant in a woman's body. And it's very difficult for people in the external world who love us, who have known us for who we used to be, to welcome and who the new person is. But at the same time, if we've lost those cells, we've lost those functions. So again, it's a matter of loving the person. Love your father for who your father is, and nurture your father back into a healthy environment and a healthy relationship. Again, every stroke is different, and every person's ability to recover is going to be unique to that specific situation. But I'm an advocate for sleep. Let this person get enough sleep so that their brain cells can rest and stop having input coming in from the external world, and allow that person then to not be on overstimulation in order for them to, when they are awake, be able to learn and regain function so that you can rebuild a new relationship.
Well, Dr. Taylor, we've got to pause for a very short break here, but we're going to be right back with more questions. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the inspiring story of a brain scientist who survived a massive stroke at the age of 37. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor has been discussing the details of how she managed to recover her ability to walk, talk, read and write, all documented in her book, My Stroke of Insight, a brain scientist's personal journey, where she also shares her recommendations for recovery and support for stroke victims. Let's get back to our questions with a question on the line from Paris. Anwar, what would you like to ask?
Thank you, Riz. I'd like to ask Dr. Taylor that she has got a vast experience about stroke, and as a scientist, she knows extremely well, I believe. So what kind of suggestion we can expect from Dr. Taylor? How would you like to advise the global audience to avoid stroke?
Okay, so in fact, actually, we had an SMS from Kadir in Kenya asking the same thing there, Dr. Taylor. What advice would you give to try to minimize the risk of a stroke?
Well, I hate to be the same old harper, but I think it's important that we take care of ourselves. I think it's important that we first keep a real close watch on our weight. Most strokes are caused by a cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease can be promoted by high blood pressure. High blood pressure can be promoted by obesity, taking care of ourselves, getting movement inside of your body, paying attention to what you eat. When you think about what can you do to prevent stroke, but then also I think it's important that we recognize what are the warning signs of stroke. One of the best ways to minimize the overall traumatic impact of a stroke on a brain is to get that person to medical treatment sooner rather than later. So the sooner that you recognize that you're having a stroke, then the sooner they can give you treatment for that and then minimize the overall impact of that stroke.
It's good to have a call from South Africa, and Miriam's on the line. Go ahead, Miriam.
I want to find out if Meniere's disease does anything with the brain cells, or brain gives some kind of trouble in the brain.
Meniere's disease.
Yes, Meniere's disease is going to involve the auditory and the vestibular system, which are intimately related to the brain. The systems are connected to one another, they're interactive with one another, they're totally dependent on one another, so absolutely.
Dr. Taylor, your recovery took 8 years for you to get back to full function. How did you change? I mean, you know, you said the person disappeared when you had that stroke, the person you were disappeared. In the recovery process, in coming back to where you are today, how have you changed?
Well, I've changed quite a bit. I can walk and talk like I used to. I have language again. Everything's really relatively back to normal. But the basic difference between who I was before the stroke and who I am now is my intention. I've shifted from being a more left hemisphere, go, 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 busy, busy, urgent kind of personality with multiple jobs. I did brain science and taught during the week, and then on the weekends I traveled for NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I was just more of a go, 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 individually driven person, climbing the Harvard ladder, just really making my splash that way. Since the stroke, I'm much more of a we consciousness. I'm so grateful to be alive. I did not die that morning. The 11 years that I've had since the stroke has just been gravy time, I call it. It's been a blessing to my life. And when you live your life with gratitude and celebration, it's very different. So I now make my decisions based on more of the collective whole. How can I make a difference that is going to impact the way we as humanity mature into really utilizing both hemispheres of our brain? And to me, the ultimate goal of what we are becoming is more of a balanced brain society where we are more compassionate, we are more loving, we are more open, and it's not so ego-driven. So I'm really very different than I used to be, even though I look like the girl I used to be.
Now, before we take another viewer question, let me ask you, you talk in a way in your book about reaching another plane, perhaps another mental plane, another spiritual plane, I don't know. Did that feature in any way? Did you find that there was any kind of spirituality associated with your experience?
Well, the left hemisphere organizes information by focusing on language, and language focuses on details. And so when I lost the details in the language, I had the big picture. And in the big picture, everything is just one big picture. Energy and molecules are all spinning in vibration. The energy of me is connected to the energy of you on the other side of the planet. So it gave me this perception that I was at one with all that is. And when you're at one with all that is, that makes you my brother, and that makes me compassionate to you, because I understand none of us were born with a manual about how to get it all right, but you have a brain, and you're going to be uniquely individual and uniquely different than I am, but ultimately we are the same. So it really did shift me. I wouldn't, many people describe it as a spiritual experience, but to me it was a collective understanding and knowingness that we are all the power of the 50 trillion beautiful cells that make up our bodies. This experience of life is a gift and a miracle in and of itself, and boy, what a wild ride we're having. So it did give me kind of a different perspective.
Well, Nadim's on the line from Germany. Good to have you with us, Nadim. Thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
Excuse me, may I say, as neuro-ophthalmologist, that a lady began her problems with the eyes. These free signals of the eyes couldn't be taken seriously by the physicians. And I think the prevention of these diseases should begin with detecting of the symptom of the optical disturbances.
Okay.
That means she has muscles, inflammation of the eye muscles.
Okay. So Nadim, actually, I don't know if you know, but Dr. Taylor actually has had a congenital issue, the arteriovenous malformation, which caused it. But I think, Dr. Taylor, that what Nadim is saying is that perhaps that there was some link between with your eye that caused the stroke.
Mine was a malformation in the blood vessels in the left hemisphere of my brain that I was born with. And for 20 years, I was experiencing small bleeds. that had been diagnosed as migraine headaches. So all I knew was that the migraine medication did not work for my migraine headaches, and I would have to go to sleep and sleep for about 24 hours. And it turns out that I was actually having small bleeds. So mine was a malformation in the blood vessels, and I was having small bleeds. And then at the age of 37, it just blew, and I had a major hemorrhage.
Dr. Taylor, I'm going to put a couple of questions to you got from email. They touch on a similar theme, and I'm going to try to squeeze these in before we end. Now, the first was from a viewer in India who wrote with a story about a man with a broken knee who got detailed description of his knee from the doctor and then visualized the healing and had a miraculous recovery, according to our viewer, who's Anjali Bhushan in Nugal in India, who said, "The human brain is a powerhouse. What Dr. Taylor has done seems to be even more enhanced as a technique of visualization." Now, the second email was from a regular contributor, Lorraine Greenwich from the UK, who wrote in with reference to autogenics, the technique of visualization to induce relaxation, which is similar to yoga and meditation. And Lorraine wrote in saying, "Does Dr. Taylor use autogenics or a form of such techniques? I'm out to buy your book today," by the way, she says. What's your view on this idea of visualization and creating kind of body healing through that?
Well, I'm going to go right back to the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere thinks in pictures. So when you use visualization, you are essentially activating the skills and abilities of the right hemisphere, which is kinesthetically connected to the rest of your body. When you look at the kinds of information that the right hemisphere specializes in, it's going to be lower tones, which are like body gurgles. And so the relationship between the right hemisphere and the body is really the one. Right. So when you think about the mind-body connection, I think of that, and visualization is the tool, the best, strongest tool, I do believe, to communicate a message to the body of what you're looking for. Right. So I absolutely did use my imagination and visualization to remember what things felt like.
Well, Dr. Taylor, I have to stop you there, though I have so many more questions. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Riz. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us. On the next show, the story of an American man who decided to do something for Palestinian children caught in the gunfire of the Middle East conflict. Join us for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.